What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. We are continuing on with the Ultra4 Jeep Wrangler JK build, and it is time to tackle our fuel system. So there's quite a few things to consider when building a fuel cell and fuel system for a race application. So we're starting off with our Jazz 32-gallon Jeepspeed fuel cell. It's a big fuel cell, has a nice concave bottom pattern for some high clearance. On our suspension links down here for up travel, we are running the TMR Customs fuel cell mount for it, but it's time to go ahead and put our fuel pump in and get this thing ready to hold fuel and pump fuel. We are going to have to modify this fuel cell. We're going to cut a new hole over here for our filler because we're going to be using this 12-bolt flange right here for our in-tank fuel pump. So Mike is on his way because I can't pull this out of the cradle with one arm, but we can go ahead and check out what we're going to be doing in this video. We're actually going to be doing a lot of stuff, but what we're running for our fuel pump is this Holley EFI Dual 450 in-tank pump. So this has a lot of cool features. First off, it's a dual pump, which means if one pump goes bad, we have a second one as backup. Also in Holley EFI software, once we get to that point in the build, we can wire this up in a ton of different ways. If we want both pumps to kick on at a certain throttle percentage, so above 70% throttle, both pumps kick in, we can do that. If we want to alternate between pump 1 and pump 2 to make sure they both survive and don't get too hot, we can do that. If we have a pump failure, we can just switch over to the second one. We also have two Holley hydromats. These are going to make sure we are always picking up fuel no matter what angle we are at in the Jeep. Now there is a lot more to the fuel system than that, but we have a pile of boxes over there. But first things first, we need to make sure we can modify this fuel cell to make sure our setup's gonna work. There's a few things I want to go over explaining what we are doing and kind of the general rules behind fuel systems in an Ultra4 rig. So Mike is pulling off our main flange here so we can get everything out of the fuel cell. So there's our little pickup tube. We're not going to end up using that because, like I said, we are running an in-tank pump. According to Ultra4 rules, you do have to have a steel fuel cell. You can run aluminum as long as it's 1.5 millimeters thick. Now the next rule is that it does have to have an internal bladder. This Jazz Jeepspeed fuel cell actually has the bladder kind of molded into the tank. So it's not a bladder that you would think about like a balloon or anything, it's just bonded to the surface. So any type of fittings that go through the fuel cell, as it says right here, has to be part of the tank or mechanically sealed by a ring and counter ring system. So typically the fill valve would sit right there in that 12-bolt flange, but since we're running the in-tank pump, we have to relocate this. So we're gonna have to drill a hole in the fuel cell and put all the bolts through. So we have our little split ring stud kit here, and this is going to act as the ring or counter ring system, and it does have a gasket on there, which should be no issues for tech. Additionally, we do have to have some kind of baffle system inside of our fuel cell. So the typical, or the most easiest baffle system is just fuel cell foam, and all that is big chunks of fuel resistant foam that sits in the tank and prevents it from sloshing around. I can't get into these out one-handed. There we go. Mike has two of them out right there. So what that does is prevent the fuel from sloshing around. Every few years, we do have to replace the foam just because it eventually does break down, but it's one of the easiest baffle systems to put in a fuel cell. Now, since we're gonna drill into this tank, we gotta pull everything out of there, and then after it, we're gonna flush it, clean it out before we put our fuel pump in there.
What are you doing, dude?
Well, it's time to go ahead and drill the first hole in the $1,200 fuel cell. What could go wrong? So we drew a pilot hole.
A perfect circle.
Well, yeah.
Drawn by Ben.
You can tell how
Give me a perfect circle on here so I can drill a hole. This is what Ben gives me.
Hey, an oval.
That's what I'm working with.
An oval is a circle. Luckily, the only thing that matters is the pilot hole. But this is a sign of how our morning's going so far. So I've always had good luck with, drilling a small pilot hole, starting that, and then before we actually send the hole saw down and start chewing, you put it on reverse and just score it. Otherwise, sometimes It likes to grab and walk, and that's not what we want to happen on this. So let's go for it, man.
They should be going through that.
So there's a lot going on here and how to actually mount and cut our fill port. So what we had to do was first cut our 4.5-inch hole into the fuel cell shell, the metal part. Once we had that, we put it back on, put a few bolts in there to make sure everything was lined up, put in our plate over here, align everything up. The big reason you have to align everything up is because the internal bladder, the plastic section, is loose inside of the shell. So we want to make sure this aligns with the plastic hole we did and the hole we're about to cut. So what we have to do is now cut out a wider section so our studs run up through the plastic and really nothing goes through the metal. And the plastic is where our gasket's gonna sit, and the metal shell is just kind of irrelevant and it's gonna float. So this actually does the same thing. So at this point, we have to cut this outer hole, put it back on, pop this in, drill the holes through the plastic tank, and then the shell is just gonna sit on the outside of this. So it's a little bit hard to explain, but what we don't wanna do is just run the bolts through the metal shell, because what'll happen is if there's a gasket on top, you can still get fuel leaking in between the plastic bladder and the metal shell. So all of the connections need to be made on the plastic shell. So we're gonna pop this back off, cut this out, and hopefully drill it out and everything lines up. Well, this was a very stressful job. Cutting into a $1,200 fuel tank is never fun. Luckily, we got it knocked out without any issues. The room for error is pretty small on this. Luckily, you know, we are done with that. It is time to take a breath and focus on the fuel pump. Now, luckily, the Holley fuel pump, much easier of a job to knock out. It's, for the most part, pretty much plug and play, directly bolt in, unless you do have to cut a hole in your fuel cell. If you do, Holley does give us a mounting ring very similar to what we installed. This is the Jazz version for that, so figured we'd use it. But if you don't have a 12-bolt flange, you're good to go with the kit. Luckily, we just had to mount it directly into the top right here. So what we had to do after that is measure from the top of the fuel cell down to the bottom, get that measurement. In our case, it was 12 3/4, or what, 12 7/8, I think? 12 7/8. Something like that. Then you measure from the base of the fuel pump up to the top. Now, the kit does include 2 small hydromats. The Holley hydromats are a game changer. Whether you're, you know, street driving, you're always gonna have fuel with these. So what it does is it relies on surface tension, wicks it through the Holley hydromat and brings it up. So no matter what angle you're at, you don't have to worry about your fuel being submerged or your pump being submerged in fuel for the pickup. The hydromat, once it's wet, surface tension draws it up through the pump. I'll try to find a video and throw it in right now so you can visually see what I'm talking about. So they have little snap rings. All they do is snap right into the pump. So we have an alignment tab right there and the pickup, and the bigger hydromats are clockable for directions. So what we do need to make sure is that our plan for these pumps, the layout inside the tank, is going to work not only with the shape of the tank, but also the hydromats, as well as all of our fuel. I don't want to break this, but with all of our fuel baffles as well, the foam in there. So we threw as many as we can in. Once we put the pump in, we're gonna stuff the last few pieces of foam in there, and then once we fill it with fuel, it'll kind of move around and settle in place. So to set the depth of this pump, we have our, hey Ellie, you coming in? You wanna show them what we're doing? You can come in, you're good. We're just making a video, talk about the fuel tank and the fuel pump. But you set the depth with these set screws right here, up and down, and if you do need to clock the pump to change the direction of where the hydromats are going to go, we have the set screws in the side. You can also get a little more depth out of the pump with that, or you can also bring it down. So we brought it up probably about 1/8 of an inch just to make sure our hydromats were going to touch the bottom of the tank. But that is a lot of talking. For the most part, this is an extremely easy pump to install. Like I mentioned, they are dual 450 pound/hour pumps. So that is a ton of fuel. We're not going to have to worry about running out of fuel and then having two pumps. If one goes bad, we switch it over to the other. It's a nice kit, having that redundancy with the dual pump. So Ellie is our videographer for today. She's going to help out. Can I get a high five? Ooh, that was solid. All right, camera is yours. So what we're doing now is installing the hydromats. We're gonna put both of them sideways because the tank angles up. There's really no need to have them going horizontally like this because the fuel is always gonna run down into the sump, to the front. That one needs to kick out.
I can't see if I'm on it.
You're on it. And now that we have our hydromats, as you can tell, they're both, you know, kind of independent of each other. They're not gonna mess with each other. The last thing to do is install our return hose right here. You wanna make sure that you're at least 1 inch away from the bottom of the tank, and you preferably want to have the return going onto a hydromat. That way, during the fluid cycle, these are always submerged in fuel, at least through the return. So at this point, we can flop the tank over, or the pump over, call this job done. We have finished up our fuel pump install and the filler neck relocation. Now, last week, got the shoulder surgery, and luckily everything is going good. As you can tell, we're back up in the shop. I'm not dead. And we got this new cool sling.
Got some accessories on it right there.
Healing up pretty quick, which is a great thing. And we've actually been up in the shop doing a few projects. You can take a sneak peek over here at the roll cage. Mike and I started that up. That video is in the works. I know a lot of people are interested in seeing the roll cage build. So that's gonna take a while. There's probably gonna be other videos coming out before that, but we are pounding away at it. Unfortunately, I'm just one arm down, but we'll be back to it pretty soon. So there are a few other things we need to talk about in regards to Ultra4 tech and kind of in the rule book, what we need to have for our fuel cell. So the first thing is we need ball valves on both the supply and return to disconnect the fuel pretty much easily accessible. That way, if there's a rollover and the driver and passenger, you know, can't do anything and there's fuel spilling out, they need to be able to reach in and pretty much just like isolate the fuel system completely.
But you're not going to be doing that, right?
No, that's not going to happen. Now, we're not getting into the install of all these components yet because I really want to have the roll cage built, the seats in. That way we can figure out our line routing and only do it once. So we will go over the fuel system real quick, what we're running, but first let's take a look at how we're gonna plumb all of this out. So we have the fuel cell here, our Holley hydromat at the bottom acting as a pre-filter going up to the pump, out of the pump to our first ball valve right there, dropping down to our filter. We're running the Holley filter right there. Really nice setup with a bracket kit as well. Goes up to our fuel rails, and it piggybacks on both of them. And then after the fuel rail, we go over to our regulator. So once again, as you can tell, we're running all Holley and Earl's stuff in regards to the fuel system. It's top-notch products. They're not gonna leak. They are gonna last. You know, it does add up. All of the AN fittings, all of the hoses, all of this stuff gets expensive fast. So a lot of people will jump over to Amazon or eBay and get some cheaper stuff. But what happens is those aren't as high quality. You can develop leaks and they're just not gonna last as long.
Just a peace of mind.
Gets a peace of mind knowing we're running some really nice stuff. The last thing I wanna deal with is chasing fuel leaks all over the place. And you know, first off, it's unsafe, and Ultra4 is extremely strict when it comes to leaks in any system, whether it's your engine, oil, transmission, diff, fuel system. You can't have any leaks whatsoever. But back to what we were talking about, we were at the regulator, right?
Yes.
So the regulator, running the Holley billet regulator, it's adjustable. This is gonna let us dial in our fuel pressure, and it comes in, goes out of our return. Now regulators, we're gonna go over this entire setup on how to set it up once we have the roll cage build and it's time to do all that. But there's a difference between like a carbureted setup and an EFI setup. Carbureted setup, it would come in, we would also have it out before our fuel rails right there. But an EFI setup, this is gonna be on the return side, so it just comes in, regulates the fuel, and goes out. So we come out, go to our return ball valve, and then drop back into the tank. One thing I didn't mention was the fuel hose. So this is the Earl's Ultra Pro stainless steel fuel hose, and I chose this opposed to just your typical rubber hose because we're gonna have a lot of vibration, a lot of movement going on, and stainless steel is a lot more abrasion resistant. Now the plan is to kind of make sure we don't have to worry about abrasion, but it's nice to have that secondary layer of protection. So that kind of covers the plan for the fuel system, except for the vent. Another thing in the rule book is that we do have to have a check valve or rollover valve in our tank for the vent system. Luckily, the Jazz Jeepspeed fuel cell, we actually have a little ball valve in there. I don't know if you can see it. It's just a check rollover valve. It's a little ball in there, so once it's inverted, the ball closes and fuel will not escape through there. But we also have to have kind of a secondary system to that. We can't rely on just having a vent tube going up to our roll cage right there, because if we do flip over, there's a possibility of fuel coming out. So we have a little example over here. It's called the 4 sides and down, or actually I think it's fast, or fats, yeah. Like something, it's fuel air trap system. But what you do is come out of whatever tank, whatever reservoir you're routing, come out, go around all 4 corners, and then down. So we have a little mock-up right here. Let's pretend we just rolled over and it ended up on our top. So all the fuel's gonna come out down to the bottom, and no matter which way we flip this, there's always a highest point above the fuel cell or whatever we're talking about. So the fuel actually gets trapped on the bottom here. We could flip it to the side and the same thing's gonna happen. We have a higher point on all 4 corners, including upside down. So we can ride it back up, and then let's say we end up on our side that way or something. Boom, you just give it a little squeeze, because I think there's probably some fluid in there. But no matter what, the fluid is not going to escape out of the bottom. So it's a really easy way for a fluid containment system. Is just to do the 4 corners, which is all that is just give you a visual example. We're gonna come out of our vent, go around all 4 corners of our fuel cell, and then up and then down. So super simple way to do it. Keeps the trails clean. Doesn't matter if we're doing a Ultra4 rig or just a trail rig. Pretty much every system should have this. And there's one more thing I want to go over real quick for those of you who are unfamiliar with AN fittings and AN lines. All it is a type of fitting, actually stands for Army Navy, and it's a super easy way to make your own fuel lines at home. So there are a few differences. I do see a lot of leaks because people don't understand the difference when you would use an ORB fitting, which is actually like an O-ring seal, versus the AN. So let's flip that upside down. The AN actually has a taper on it. It seals on the taper. ORB is going to seal on the O-ring. So if you're, this is a -12, but there is no taper in here. So this would require sealing with the O-ring, which would be an ORB. If you are doing a fitting like this, this is AN. So it's important to make sure you're using the correct fitting, whether it's AN or an O-ring fitting. So that's one thing to take a look at, whatever you're putting it into. The fuel rail, for example, is an ORB fitting. So it'd be a -8 ORB. If you try to put it in with an AN fitting with a taper, it's not gonna seal. You're only relying on the threads to seal it instead of a taper. So there is a major difference between AN and ORB ends, but that is a lot of talking. Let's go ahead and throw these Ultra Pro ball valves in, and that's probably gonna wrap up the video. So Cassie's gonna throw those in. I'm looking forward to doing the wiring on this Jeep. There's a lot of cool tips and tricks I wanna share in regards to wiring, but here's a little example. Instead of using butt connectors, crimps, the whole Jeep is probably gonna have these douche connectors, however you wanna pronounce it. These are extremely nice. They're waterproof, or not waterproof, but they're, you know, weather resistant. They're not gonna come undone with vibration or any of that. And they're super easy for troubleshooting because you can unplug them 1,000 times, get your meter in there, check for continuity or voltage, really whatever you wanna do. So these are super simple to install. They just thread on right there. We have our ball valves, make sure we have enough clearance, and then we can continue on our fuel system from there. So I'm looking forward to doing the whole plumbing. So hooking up these ball valves is extremely simple. You just gotta make sure you're getting all the right adapters and all the right fittings.
This took a lot of skill.
Took a lot of skill
for me to put these on.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
But these look really good. They should be easy to reach right from the back here if they need to disconnect it, or from the side. And then of course we have our 90-degree elbows, which we're gonna tighten into our hose right there, and that's actually making our AN lines right there, but we're gonna do that in another video.
All right, I'll put this one on.
So that is going to be about it for this video, guys. Like always, thanks for watching. Please give the video a thumbs up. If you have any questions in regards to fuel systems or any of that, let me know in the comments below, and we will see you next week with the next video.